right, hello. Welcome everyone. Welcome to another episode of BIM After Dark Live. Oh man, I cut off my music, darn. All right. Welcome. This is episode 63, I believe, of BIM After Dark Live. My name is Jeff, also known as the Revit Kid. If this is your first time seeing the show, this is a weekly live stream here on YouTube where we talk about Revit, BIM, and pretty much any adjacent software and technologies. Today I have an awesome guest that I'm super excited to introduce, but we're going to be talking about family creation through a little bit of a different lens. And so definitely stick around if you're interested in seeing a bunch of awesome family tips, but also if you've been wondering kind of what it's like to be someone who maybe makes families and gets paid to do it. And so I think it's going to be kind of a unique perspective, so definitely stick around and check it out. As usual, this is a live stream. If you're here right now at 9 p.m. Eastern Thursday night, feel free to chat. I will be keeping an eye on the chat the whole time. As you guys know, I always keep an eye for questions and like to ask the guests questions and let you guys sort of feed the direction of the conversation as well. Hey Paul, what's going on? First Revit Kid live, joined from UK, dude. Isn't it like 5 or 2 or 3 a.m. there or something like that? Cool, man. Not sure if you're rolling in or you're just starting your day or ending your day, but welcome, Paul. All right, before we jump into it, as you guys know, we do have a new sponsor this season. I'm super excited to talk about it. So let me roll the clip here. So Polycam, for those of you who've seen recent episodes, I talked a little bit about it, but Polycam is a iPhone and iPad app that you use for creating LiDAR scans as well as photogrammetry scans. And so I was introduced to Polycam almost a year ago when I first bought this little phone right here, which is an iPhone 12, I think, 12 Pro. And I was super excited to try out the LiDAR features for scanning. And so the first app that I found was Polycam, and I tried it out. And I've actually devised a workflow for getting these scans, not just scans, but photogrammetry scans as well, into Revit. So keep an eye out on the channel for some information on that. But if you're interested in trying it out, feel free to check it out at polycam.bimafterdark.com, or make sure you hit the little QR code that's on the screen right there. Install the app on your iPhone or your iPad. Try it out. It's free to try and make scans. You do have to pay if you want to use specific export versions, but it's only a couple bucks a month and it's totally worth it, I promise you, especially when I show you a little more detail. So awesome. Thank you, Polycam, for sponsoring this episode and this season. I appreciate it. All right. So without further ado, oh man, 1 a.m. Dude logs in at 1 a.m. That's so awesome. Without further ado, I am going to introduce our guest. So let me just make sure your audio is on. Brenton Wiberg, thank you for joining, buddy.
Hey guys. Hey Jeff.
This is going to be fun. I know you and I have chatted online quite a bit, and I was really excited to get you on to talk about Revit family creation. It's a topic that we haven't touched on in a few episodes here on the show. I did a few last, I don't even remember when anymore, 63 episodes. It's been a while. Actually, for those of you who haven't seen, maybe, I know there's a couple people that said this is the first time maybe joining, head on over to live.bimafterdark.com and you can see all 62 previous episodes. But Brenton, welcome. Maybe before we jump into anything more, give everyone a little bit of a background on yourself, a short little bio on who you are and what you do, and then we can talk about why I thought it'd be fun to have you on.
Okay, awesome. Well, I started probably with Revit 13 years ago, back before they started numbering them by the years. I think it was like Revit 8 or 9 or something.
Yep, 8.1 or 9.1, right? Was the last one
before
it
rolled
out.
Something like that.
Yep.
And then I loved the program. And then I immediately got into family making because it's my jam. It's like a perfect balance between aesthetics and puzzle solving. Anyway, so I've always loved that. I worked in an architectural firm as a drafter for a long time, and I would make families in-house in addition to all the drafting. Then I became a BIM manager for a mid-sized construction company in California. And then I moved kind of to Navisworks and the coordination side of BIM. And then I started my own um, firm to start doing architectural design and then moved back. So I'm from Utah. I moved to California and I'm back in Utah now. And I started making families professionally probably 6 years ago and started selling them and family making services. So that's kind of my brief history.
Awesome. Yeah, and so that's kind of how you and I connected. And I'll put all the links we mentioned. I will make sure are in the description here and then in the blog post tomorrow. But the Revit Family site, if you guys are interested, is revitfamily.biz. And I believe you have casework, windows, doors, and one more package, right? Or is it just casework, windows, and doors right now?
That's it. And then I'm about to release railings and
Awesome.
fences.
Oh, cool. Well, that'll be fun. I can't wait to check those out.
Yeah.
And I have intimate knowledge with the casework families, and they are primo. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
We got a few questions already. It's so funny. What is the weirdest
Awesome.
family clients ask you to build? We'll get into questions, but let's so part of the reason I wanted Brenton to come on when we were sort of chatting about it is I thought it'd be kind of fun for the audience here to talk about not just family creation tips, because I know you guys out there are just gonna love tips. That's what you come here for, is all the tips and tricks. But I'm always interested in different perspective on these things, and so I think your perspective, getting paid to do something versus maybe me if I had to build it for in-house for a company or something, I think you might have a different approach maybe to how you put these things together. So I'm interested to see sort of how your tips align with that perspective versus maybe someone who's not doing it professionally. But I guess before we jump into that, I'm curious as to how you sort of, because I do think there may be some folks on here that are here less for the tips of family creation, maybe more for maybe they want to make families and become, do that and get paid to do that, maybe consulting or whatever. So maybe we could talk a little bit about how, what made you decide, let me try and sell some Revit families that I made.
Yeah.
As opposed to like dump them on Revit City and say, see you later.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Um, Man, I think it was mostly if you've ever tried to make a family, I don't think you understand the value of a good family until you've tried to make them yourself. Just understanding how time consuming a good parametric family can be, and then just all of the troubleshooting it takes to get them to work properly. Um, that is really kind of what got me thinking like, okay, these are valuable.
Hmm.
And I was making them for myself anyways. And my first set that I started selling was millwork, because no matter where I worked, millwork always seemed to be the problem. The stuff out of the box from Revit did not look nice.
It works for it works for documentation. I'll give them that, but it definitely
Exactly.
does not look nice. Yes.
Yeah. And if you're putting out an interior elevation, does it
True,
show a
true.
cabinet? Yes, but I don't know. I don't know what your client's going to think. So at the architectural firm I was working for, we had a whole library of cabinets, but they were still generic looking. They were better than the Revit ones, but I don't know. Anyway, so it had been on my list for years. Like, I just need to make a good library because I kept getting these jobs.
Hmm.
And when you're designing as an architect, you don't have time or the mental capacity to stop what you're doing with the building
Mhm.
just so that you can make the cabinets look good. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna spend months doing this full time. That's what I did for months and months, was that base set of cabinets.
Mhm.
And then after I'd spent all that time, I'm like, man, it's crazy to me to think there are hundreds of firms all over the world having to do the same thing again and
Over and
again.
over and over
Why
again.
do we, yeah, why do we replicate work? So I'm like, maybe there's value. I put enough effort into this. I feel confident it would save people time and money for
Mhm.
sure.
Mhm.
Like, if I sold this for a certain price, it, like, I try to sell my cabinets for like, I don't know, 1 or 2 hours worth of a senior drafter's time,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
You'll never make 60 cabinets in, 2 hours of a drafter's time. So I'm
Right.
thinking, okay, that's affordable for them. It'll save them time.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I posted that, and I guess that's where the idea came from. I found value in it, and I hope someone else did.
Mhm.
And yeah, slowly it started to pick up.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I guess to stay on this sort of this topic of just sort of getting paid to do it or whatnot. I'm curious when you're building a library like this, how often are you getting asked to modify, customize, or tweak things? Because I obviously, and I've seen your families. I do have or your cabinet package. They are parametric, you know, and but we all know that to some extent, right? There's only so many parameters that you can build into something where somebody may want. So I'm curious from a curiosity standpoint, just like if you were to sell floor plans or elevations, how often those things would want to be tweaked by clients.
Right. Yep. Um, Pretty often
Yeah.
I regularly get requests to modify. And so for a while I was doing an hourly rate, but I think what people don't realize how complicated they are. So I usually will try to help people modify them themselves rather than try to do it myself. But
Mm.
yeah, it happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The hardest part about creating families professionally by far is pleasing everyone with
Which you're never
one
gonna
set
do,
of
right?
tasks.
Yeah, you're never
No,
gonna do it.
it's
But that
impossible.
is interesting.
Yeah,
That's an interesting approach. I didn't think about that because I was comparing it to like if you sell base house plans or something with the idea that here's the base set, but you hire me as the designer to tweak them a little bit, and that's how you get it. But that's interesting. Sort of you know teaching them how to modify the families is kind of an interesting approach. It's sort of teach a man to fish and then sort of let
right.
them go, which is pretty cool. So I applaud that. That's a neat approach to it. Um, I'm just reading some of the chat here. Junior and Skyward, all these guys are here. What's up, guys? A bunch of regulars, a few electrical folks out there asking about electrical
Oh.
families. I think I don't. I'm sure, Brenton. I'm sure you've made electrical or lighting or something families,
Yeah.
but I don't think we're gonna go down the rabbit hole of electrical families and symbols and all that stuff, guys. Sorry, just not this
Yeah.
episode. Maybe
That
a
is
future
on my
episode.
that is on my list because residential
Mm.
electrical symbols in Revit are not great. So I've made those personally, but they're
and
not up to my standards.
and then the families, and then if how you want them to look graphically versus
Yeah.
there's definitely a need there. I agree with you on that one. To who is that, Susanna and Chris, I'm sorry we're not going to dig down that rabbit hole today, but maybe in a future episode we can bring it up if there's enough need and want in the industry there. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll start rolling into some tips, and then hopefully we'll get some awesome questions as we go along. You guys probably hear the music coming in. That music means it's a little break for our new segment on the show, which is the Big Bad BIM tip of the week. So let me just play. And for those of you who are not familiar with this segment, this is a segment sponsored by Enscape. If you guys don't know, let me roll the music there. There we go. If you guys don't know what Enscape is, it is a real-time rendering engine plugin for Revit. If you're interested, I've got a whole bunch of content on the channel and on my blog that I will post links to about it. And I will also be talking about Enscape 3.2 pretty soon, which is coming out soon, and some really neat features. So definitely check it out. If you're interested, head on over to enscape.bimafterdark.com, and I believe you will get 10% off a subscription to Enscape. So definitely worth trying out. I promise you will not regret it. And it'll also show them that you heard of them here on the show. So this is the Big Bad BIM tip of the week, which is submitted by you, the audience. These are not my tips. These are audience submitted tips. So if you have a tip, that your favorite Revit tip, feel free to shoot me an email and let me know. Or like this guy did, you can even shoot me a video of the tip and I can just play it. And if I choose your tip, I will send you a free t-shirt. So without further ado, this is from Ian. And this is a really neat tip, not just because it's a really valuable tip, but also because it took information that he learned here on the show from previous episodes, one with Dana, so I'll put links to that, and another one recently that I had about shared parameters. So without further ado, Ian, here's your tip. Thanks for submitting it, buddy.
Hey Jeff, I wanted to share a tip with you that I came up with after watching the calculating occupancy video on your YouTube page with Dana. I loved that, and I've been using it ever since. One problem I was coming across, though, was the occupancy total that Revit gave you was just the grand total, and really you can see here there are multiple exits for this school, and I really love using Excel to just add numbers for me and as a double check as well. So I'd already, used. Let me see. Open this up here. I'll take the area schedule here and I'll export it. As a schedule, and then open that text file up into Excel. So then I'm able to use Excel to add those numbers up for me. But again, it was just giving me grand totals. So I was like, surely there has to be a way to give each room be able to dictate which exit each room is going to. So I ended up creating a shared parameter. It was my first kind of dive into shared parameters of exit reference. So there's that, and then creating that puts it over here. So I'm able to say which room, which exit the room is going to, and then I went into the family of the room tag that Dana had supplied, and I've since modified it to kind of match our graphics. But and then here I was able to, since I believe this is the shared parameter aspect of it, go into here and add a label, and then pull over that exit reference from here as into the tag. So then it creates, it's another column I can pull over into this schedule here. And then here I can divide it up into each exit location. And then I can pull this over into Excel and give me totals for each one. And it's just been really handy, especially later on down the line with code reviews when you need to change an occupancy here or there. It's really easy now just to go in and change a number, re-export it. And then the last thing I do as well, which helped me visually, was just you can take those exit references then and add them to a color scheme. So you turn that on, and then visually you can see very quickly kind of how your rooms are divided for each exit. So that's my tip, and hope you guys like it. Thanks.
Awesome, man. So thank you, Ian, for recording a video and submitting it. Thank you, Enscape, for supporting this segment. Again, it's enscape.bimafterdark.com. And if you guys have a tip that you'd like to see here on the show, be sure to email me. And I will say, if you send me a video, I usually am more likely to choose it, but no, I'm just kidding. I do have a whole bunch of tips in the queue here, and you guys are awesome for doing it. So hopefully you guys like that. It was very specific, but I do think it could be valuable to many. And it was episode 36 was actually the episode that he's talking about, where Dana came on talking about occupancy, creating occupancy tables and all this cool stuff, with a bunch of free sample files that he was using. And then shared parameters was episode 56. So definitely check those out. And yeah, thanks for sending that again, Ian. All right, so let's jump back into it. Brenton, I know you were sitting there. Unfortunately, you didn't get to see the tip, so you'll have to watch it afterwards. But it was pretty cool. It was he used shared parameters to modify egress calcs and stuff. It was pretty neat. Unfortunately, you don't get to see it. I'm sorry. I was just reading the chat while we were going along, and there was a little conversation going on about family creation and stuff. And there are some people updating their companies' Revit families and talking about how challenging it is and in the time. So it's kind of right along the lines of what you were talking about, where sometimes it may make sense to pay for a family or pay for someone to do it, depending on what your role is. So completely along the lines of what it is. All right, so let's jump into it. And maybe what we'll do is we'll just jump into, I know you have a list of tips and we probably won't get through all of them, but maybe if you want, Brenton, we'll just start with a tip, and I'm sure it'll drive the conversation who knows where. And then, of course, guys in the chat, if you have questions on the tips or anything we're doing along the way, feel free to ask. So the floor is yours, Brenton.
Okay, awesome. So I was thinking, I what I've done is I've prepared a bunch of tips and tricks, and I don't know where people land or where they want to start or whatnot. But I think one of the things for me when I was first starting is, um, like I said, I started 12 to 13 years ago. So back then there was not the content on family making that there is now.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started with bad habits. And so one of the things I've learned now doing things professionally is the way you start a family completely changes how smoothly the process goes later.
Okay,
Um,
let's unpack that. I'm curious to hear what you mean by that.
okay, well,
Are
okay,
you
so if
talking
you've ever
strictly
made
with template, or you're talking about process, how you start the process of laying it out?
a good question. So process, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely a little template tweaking you can get
Mm-hmm.
into, but for the most part, Revit kind of gives you the default families.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I'm definitely talking about process because if you've made a family that's parametric, you know you probably spend more time troubleshooting than you do actually like modeling anything, at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it's usually because you've done something and you don't know where you did it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found that if you follow some, like I call them, just best practices. And I think now probably anyone that teaches you family making will teach these to you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you guys haven't gone to like some professional courses or anything, then I'm just going to start us off.
Let's do
And
it.
I think in order to demonstrate these and not just be me talking about the practices, I'm just going to start a family and
Sure.
we'll just take it as far as everyone wants to go. It's going to be a dining room table family, and I've got it to where we can start basic and then we can go to the nth degree.
Cool.
So,
I like it. Let's do it.
okay.
Fun.
So, I'm just going to start a new family. And I don't, I use a lot of keyboard shortcuts, and because this isn't like an actual tutorial video, I'm just going to go
Yeah,
and
that's
explain
okay.
what I'm doing. If I need to slow down, people can ask me, but
Yeah, if
okay.
anyone if anyone is curious as to maybe a keyboard shortcut you used, then I'll keep an eye on to see if they have any questions there. But I don't think you need to sit and explain all the keyboard shortcuts in this session for sure. I agree.
Right. Okay. So the first thing I always do is the first time I made cabinets, I thought, oh yeah, they always go on a wall. So what was the first thing I did? I picked a wall-based template, which is the worst idea ever. So now when you start, I start almost always with a generic model, just because you can start there and you can always host it to something after. But once you host it to something, it's very difficult to get it back.
That's a tip in and of itself, right? You're starting with a standalone generic model.
Yeah.
And if you start with a hosted object, you are kind of stuck, right? And so that's a great tip in and of itself, starting with generic model and then converting it afterwards if you need to, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Paul Oben has a great, if you accidentally were like me and you have something hosted and you need to get it back unhosted, Paul Oben has like a pretty good workaround for that.
Awesome.
Okay, so the first thing I always do is I tell people start with a skeleton of what you're going to build. Don't do any geometry yet. The first thing you always want to do is start building the family. We're building a dining room table. Let me kind of show you our goal here. So I have this table I saw online. Looked good to me. Let's start there. It's simple and we can make it complicated if we want. So this is kind of what I'm going for. And maybe to touch just a little bit on beginning your family. The first thing I always do when I'm starting a new family is identify the end user, because it completely drives or should be driving all the decisions you make. What parameters are, type parameters, what parameters are going to be instance, what parameters you should even have, what are they going to use, what aren't they going to use. You need to know all this kind of up front.
That's interesting, actually. So I guess maybe can you think of an example where maybe that would change, by like how you approach something would change? Are you saying like maybe architect versus engineer, or maybe interior design versus architecture? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, from my perspective right now in my life, yes. But even if I was working at just a company, when I used to do families for just in-house, there were there was someone who was requesting the family.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, it was even better because I intimately knew that person. I knew how savvy they were with technology.
Mm-hmm.
I knew how they were going to use the family.
Mm-hmm.
So that would change like how detailed I would get it. Because if I know you need like a millwork family for just to throw in real quickly, that is different than
Mm-hmm.
if we're going to distribute across the whole company, right?
Right.
And then in my case, yeah, I run into that all the time. I put my cabinets out there from an architect's perspective when I first sold them.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's kind of a balance between detail and looks.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's like I get interior designers starting to write me like, I want it to do this. And then cabinet makers picked it up and were like, I want it to do this. And then, yeah, it goes out the wall after that.
Yeah. I never really thought about that. That's because, usually my thoughts are, my goal usually is again, I'm not doing it for someone to purchase. It's usually for usage within the company or myself. And so I'm usually thinking setting up parameters for the sake of to me, I always say the most successful families are the ones where you don't have to go into the family environment to modify them, right? If whatever you need to do, you can do in the project. But you just made a great point that like maybe it makes sense for an architect to have a type parameter for X, Y, and Z, whereas an interior designer or a manufacturer may want those to be instance parameters. And I never really thought about that. So that's fascinating actually to me.
Yeah, and then depending on the way you assemble your family, I've noticed also makes a big difference. Like I use type catalogs for building the cabinets once I have them, and that also affects what's type and what's there's a lot of things to consider.
Awesome, cool.
Anyways, okay, so we're in our generic model here. And like I said, I think once you kind of know what you're getting at and you've thought about your end user and you know what parameters they're going to use, then let's start putting a skeleton together. So for this table, we definitely want a length. We want the length to be adjustable, the width, the height, like some of those standards. So what I mean by a skeleton is I always make them out of reference planes, sometimes reference lines if I'm doing something like circular or arcs. Those are a little better controlled with reference lines. But so I'm just going to set up the standard. If you've ever done a family, this is almost always how you start with like the length and width reference planes, and then you got to equalize them. So we're gonna put an equal constraint here, so that when you change the width or the length, it kind of does it evenly across the center point. Okay, then once we do that, I'm just going to quickly add the length and width parameters. Okay, so now we've got our tabletop, right? We're in the reference view. This is kind of what our tabletop looks like right now. No parameters assigned. So let's start assigning parameters. So really quickly, I got to move. I've got all this probably invisible bars to you guys, but it's blocking my, okay. Yeah, oh man, sorry, one sec, let me move everything around here so that I can.
Yeah, we don't see the bars, so that's good.
Yeah, it just keeps me from clicking on anything. Okay, so we're gonna do length here. And for the sake of this video, we'll get into it later, but I'm gonna leave everything as a type parameter. Width here. And I basically do this because we're going to flex the model once we set up the skeleton, just to make sure our parameters are working. And I like to flex the model. And if you don't know what flexing is, it just means once you have your parameters, you change the parameters and make sure you're not breaking anything, right? And I do that as I'll do little steps, flex, because you don't want to get to the finished product and it's not working. You don't know where you went wrong if you're not constantly like flexing. So my first breaking point to let me know I need to flex is once I have the skeleton done. So we've got our width and our length going on. So if we go up to here to the family properties, we can see them. So the table probably is maybe like 8, and then maybe it's 3 feet wide. So we're just going to do that. And oh, you can see I already made a mistake. This is good. It did not put the, no EQ. So
live show, it's all good.
Yeah, I got to go here and I need to hit that equal constraint.
Mm-hmm.
And now if I bring that back up and we put it back at 3 and 8. But that's why you flex it early on. If I would have waited till later, it's you've got to rehost geometry or something, depending on what you did.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got width, length. Let's go to a front view and just really quickly do height. And then I'm going to copy that down. Oops. And we're going to do thickness as well. Okay, then again, we'll flex it. The other thing I like to do, and I suggest to everyone, is if it's not going to be a complicated family, you don't really need to bother sorting your parameters. But my families have probably, they could have like 20 to 50 parameters in them. Mm-hmm. So I definitely sort them. And everyone has a different way of doing this. I worked with one guy who puts everything in alphabetical order, which I do not like because it doesn't make logical sense for users in my head, because a user doesn't know the names of all the parameters. So they don't know what they're looking for when they're looking down the list, right? Mm-hmm. I always do it by what are they most likely to change first, and then I kind of do it. So here it's usually going to be like length and width. So I would put length and width first, then height and thickness. In my mind, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So that's a great tip. That's and honestly, I haven't. If you go back to that where you move the parameters up and down, I forgot that even existed. where you just moved them in the rows there. So anyone just missed what he did there. So he selected a row. And then there's an up and down where you can move them along. And I was just going to ask you, how are you doing it? And then I remembered, oh my gosh, you can actually move them along, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that was probably, I don't remember how many years ago, but I about died when they finally let us organize them.
Yeah, no, yeah. I completely forgot that existed, which was awesome. I thought you were going to start renaming, because some people will do that where they will rename them and stuff like that. But no, and that's a great tip too, is ordering them in logical make sense, logically. If you were modifying this table, what would kind of make sense to where you would want them to be, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and we'll get into it more too. Right now, these are all dimensions, so I leave them in the dimensions category, mm-hmm. But also that's another level of sorting, is what category you put them in. And I get into that too, because I keep it consistent across all my families. So if you're a user of my families, it's a consistent experience. And like if you were making these for your company, you'd want it to be a consistent experience as well.
Jim Balding had a great comment here, which I was going to ask you actually anyways, is when you're flexing, I know a tip that I learned a long time ago is creating two types and then flipping between them. Do you typically like to just manually type in when you're flexing, or will you do that, create two types and flip back and forth, or like maybe you have an idea as to why one works over the other or something?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. If you're constantly doing the same dimension changes, I think that's a great. I don't usually spend the time to do it. Not that it takes that much time, mm-hmm. But I don't do it because I'm constantly adding new ones as I'm flexing.
I was just gonna say that's always been the problem for me too. Is I think it's a great tip once you're done, but when you're adding parameters, it is a pain in the butt because you have to change both types then, or I guess change one and hopefully whatever you get
exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what I was.
So that is a good. The other thing I've done in the past too is sometimes I'll do like an undo redo just to see, visually see the type. So even if you manually change them, if you do control Z, control Y or something like that back and forth, then you can flip to like a different view and do it or something like that and just see those changes happening.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I've done that before. Okay, so we kind of talked about all that. So basically this is kind of my first, when I say best practices, I know this was all very simple, but I'm telling you, if you remember to make a skeleton first, the troubleshooting later will save you a ton of time, because the next thing we're going to do is you never constrain geometry to other geometry, and you don't just constrain it with constraints. You tack it to the skeleton, right? Like it's muscle on a skeleton. And that also helps a lot more, because when you start constraining straining things in Revit, you need to know what you're constraining it to. And sometimes it's ambiguous when you're doing like edge to edge. You don't always know what you're selecting. So, and I'll maybe just illustrate it as easier. Okay, so we're going to get into creating the geometry. So we'll go back to the top view and we'll extrude here the tabletop. Okay, this is another thing. Okay, so once you get the rectangle, you get all your lock symbols. And in this case, it's the only thing on the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and lock right here. But if you had a complex family and there was geometry under here too, I would not lock these like this because who knows what they're locking to. I would do the align thing where you select the line and then align it. Yeah, and then lock it. But there's nothing else to align here. So I think it's a safe. Right, then we'll go back.
But that is a good point. That is definitely a good tip there is don't press those locks unless you know what the hell they're locking to.
Yeah. I think when I was first learning, you just learn to lock them and you think you know what you're doing. You're completely oblivious to all the things you're doing that could be causing you problems. And so you're shocked at the end when nothing's working. Like, what the hell is Revit doing? Like, I didn't tell it to do this.
We actually have a couple of good questions. I think we could probably answer now just because I don't want to go too far away from the topics. But Steph, hey Steph, great to see you on the chat again. Do you have any specific naming standards or anything for parameters that you've developed over time, or is it very specific?
It's hard to do naming standards just because it's so. I mean, there's some things you use again and again, length, width, height. But nothing crazy, honestly. As far as parameters go, my qualification is that it makes sense. There are certain things like don't use certain characters because it keeps you from using that parameter in an equation. So I would say there are no letters, but other than that, I just short, and anything that'll get the idea to the end user and still be short is kind of my qualifier.
Yes. I would add a little a qualification to that. Don't abbreviate stuff if it doesn't make sense. The amount of families that I've opened with like HH, XY, ZZ, it's like at least like you're saying, I think to me that makes the most sense. It's something that makes sense logically to people. Christopher Hansen, hey Chris, nice to see you again, asked, do you prefer constraining in sketch mode or would you rather constrain outside of sketch mode? So I guess what he's saying there is like you just showed with the geometry, do you prefer doing it in sketch mode or once you created the geometry?
Okay, I would say probably I usually do it in the sketch mode. The one thing I will say I don't do in sketch mode though is I used to do it a lot where you get in sketch mode and you realize you don't have a reference plane for something that you're sketching. And the temptation is to either draw a new reference plane and then set your constraints, or just don't use a reference plane and constrain from other pieces of the sketch. That I don't do. I'll literally exit my sketch, go back out and build the skeleton properly, and then come back in. Because it's a nightmare to troubleshoot when you have all these hidden reference planes inside sketches because you don't see them when you're outside of the model. And so when you're troubleshooting, you're missing half the picture.
No, that's a great tip too. That's something that I've seen on a few families that could definitely burn you, and is building reference planes within sketch mode. And I guess a lot of good questions here actually, so might as well hit some of them. And this one I think probably goes more along the lines of the fact that when you're building families for clients, how do you choose what version to do them in Revit? I'm sure in a firm maybe it's a little easier to figure out because it's an internal discussion that can happen, but when it comes to like selling a family library, how do you choose what version to do? And for anyone new to Revit who maybe doesn't know, Revit can't save backwards. So if Brenton made a family for a client in 2022 and they use 2016, they can't use that family.
Yeah, so just as a standard, I think I started my cabinets in 2017, so I keep it in even my newest families, I keep in 2017, and it kills me because there's new features in the family editor I would love to use. but it cuts out so many people if I do it in a newer version. So yeah, I just go back to 17.
And that's just because that's where you started them, I guess, right at that moment in time. So you keep
Yeah.
them there, which makes sense.
I did accidentally make a bunch of electrical families that I intended to sell. I made them in 2021.
Ooh.
And now I'm like, oh, dang it. They're going to have to be in 2021 because there's nothing
Yep.
I can do about it now
Yep.
unless I redo them all.
Yep. No, it's a challenge. It's even a challenge with creating learning content and having it in older versions versus newer versions. You know, it can be a challenge. And
Yeah.
so my tip to everyone out there is just upgrade, because there's always great features, and you're probably on subscription anyway, so might as well use the latest version of Revit.
Yeah,
But
I agree with
I
that.
understand.
Yeah.
I understand for some people. I understand keeping projects in a certain version if it's large projects you don't want to upgrade. But if you're starting from scratch, starting fresh, you might as well use the latest version. There was one more question I wanted to hit just while we're doing some Q&A in between. I think it was a little earlier. Sorry, who was it? Ernesto. Hey, Ernesto. He asked if there was any, and I guess this kind of ties off of last week's episode, which is all about add-ins. If there's any add-ins you use to help with any of these processes, plugins, add-ins, anything like that, scripts. I guess I'm assuming maybe what they're talking about there, especially is if you had to tweak something for clients that was like a redundant process or something. I don't know. Is there any plugins you use to help you?
Not in Revit for family making. For my projects, definitely, but for the family making, no. Most of the time, everything's so unique. There are some repetitive tasks, but those I can do outside. Like that's why I use a type catalog to change parameters, because I can bring it into Excel and do mass changes in Excel. Or renaming families to be a company standard or something. I have like little tools that are Windows, just little programs that'll do mass renaming, but nothing in Revit.
Got it. Sweet. There's a couple of comments there. It said, if someone made a plugin that would save families backward, they would make millions. Yes, they would.
Yes.
I don't think anyone's gotten there yet. So.
Yeah, to go backwards compatible or unhost things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, let's jump back into it.
Okay. All right. So I don't know if we saw this or not, but I just pulled this and locked this to the thickness to the top and the bottom of the thickness. Another thing I'm gonna do is we'll make the legs next. So let's go back to the reference plane. If you remember our image here, I don't know where I put the image. I'm just gonna reopen it. We just kind of have these simple legs. So I'm just we're gonna make the skeleton for that real quick. Here we go. And then for this particular tutorial, I guess we can give this a parameter. Like inset. This is one of those things like you need to know your audience. Would anyone ever move these legs? I don't know. If it's a manufacturer, they probably manufacture them a set distance from the end, so there's no point in doing this, but we'll make it parametric because we can.
It's an easy one too, right?
Yeah, it's not going to break anything. Okay, so then the next thing we're going to do is I'm just going to go to a left view and let's just draw the legs. And here's another opportunity. I should probably make for the edge of my leg here. We'll just bring it in 4 inches or something. Let's constrain it. All right, and then we'll just do an extrusion. And here is another thing I'm just going to talk about really quickly. So Revit, if you're new to family making, Revit will try to do intelligent things. It will try to assume what constraints it thinks you're trying to do. So the fact that I just drew these lines on reference planes, it knows that it should probably move those sketch lines with the reference planes. And here I'm going to do an offset of those lines. Let's just do 2 inches. And because I do an offset of 2 inches, it probably is going to assume I want to keep those 2 inches from the other lines. But so this is what I would do often when I was new is I would flex the family without doing the constraints to see if it assumed the right thing. And if it did, then I would consider it done because it was working at the time. But then later you add a new feature that interferes with that logic and it no longer works anymore. So it was working and then it doesn't work. And then you're like, where did I go wrong? Because it was working. And so you never let Revit assume anything if you can control it. So I'm just going to show you, if you go to visibility graphics while you're in the Family Maker and you go to annotation categories and turn on automatic sketch dimensions, it shows you in blue all the assumed relationships that Revit just made while I was sketching. So you can see it's got like a 0-inch, like it's lining these zeros, they're lining up with the reference plane. And then the 2 inches, you can see it's made that constraint. So your goal when you're constraining in a sketch is to get rid of all the blue. So we're going to really quickly constrain this sketch. And you can see when I make the constraint myself, it disappears. The assumed relationship disappears. Mm-hmm. So this is a good way. If you can also troubleshoot this way, if something's misbehaving and you can't quite figure it out, usually I do this with arcs or circles because I can never quite tell what Revit is doing sometimes. And this will sometimes give you a clue of what's interrupting your workflow. Okay, here I'm going to do something I maybe just told you not to do. I'm going to constrain geometry. Actually, I'm doing this. I'm going to constrain the reference plane and the sketch. Like I just make sure I'm getting the reference plane. That way it's still constrained to this reference plane and not the geometry. I think if you're not being careful, you'll just click like this, like I was originally trying to do. And that's a bad idea, in my opinion. And I can see I missed a constraint here because there's still a blue. There we go. Okay, so now everything's tied down. Did I lock? I did lock everything, right? Okay, so no more blue. This thing can't move. I knowingly told it what to do. Okay, so then I'm just going to finish. And so that, right, this is the other thing. It assumed when I did that sketch, it assumed the center line was the sketch plane. So we're just going to really quickly, I want this 4 inches wide. So I'm going to split it across the hosted plane. We'll just do 2 inches in one direction and negative 2 inches in another. So then it just split it across that plane. And the reason I did this, rather than trying to move it or constrain it by stretching it, I like it when they're hosted to a plane. So we're just going to change the plane it's hosted to. So you can go up here to edit work plane and you can pick the plane. And we're just going to pick these planes that we originally intended for those legs. That way, when we go up, when we flex it later, when we move this work plane, it's going to move with it and it's going to stay the right dimensions.
That's actually pretty neat. That's usually, the initial, and I'll do it too, is usually you just pull, you're going to push it away, right? And it will work, right? If you push it away, you lock the geometry. But to your point, even though it's working, the work plane of that object is still that middle plane, right? Even though you've pulled it and pushed it and you're using all the reference planes to keep it in place. But it's a good point where I can imagine in more complex examples, keeping that center as your work plane always, even though the geometry is going all over the place, might not be a good idea.
Yeah, because I've had so many bad experiences and had so many problems, and I've spent literally 4 hours sometimes just finding one problem. You have this like get weary, and so you start like learning like this will save me time later.
Right.
Okay, so the other thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to mirror this across the center either, because it will probably lose its constraint to that work plane.
I was just going to say that's another good tip by using the work plane the way you are, is you can, without copying and mirroring is usually also what messes things up, right? Because you lose your work plane and then you have no idea what it's actually hosted to anymore.
Yeah, you won't find out till later.
Yes, you'll find out when you don't want to find out, right?
So I'm going to hit the copy button and I'm going to move it 0. So there's a copy here, and we're just going to do the same thing. Edit the work plane, pick a plane, and I'm just going to pick the other one. And there we go. So now we have our table, and the thing I always do at this point, once I have my geometry, I'm just going to give it material. Whoops, sorry, I'm going to assign it a material parameter. So tabletop. Okay, and then the legs. Could have saved myself a step by assigning the material before I copied the leg, but okay. Because for some reason, it's my pet peeve when I get stuff off Revit City and the materials aren't assigned to it. I'm like, this is so easy, just assign it.
Oh, I know. Whenever I teach anyone family creation, it's always you have to like give me a material parameter. Like it's a required. It's required for you to get an A in this course is to put material parameters in your families, please.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the part where if you're new to this, it's not going to give you any anxiety. But if you're me and you've done enough parametric families, you should be a little anxious when you flex because you do not want an error box. So you're like crossing your fingers, your heart's beating out of your chest, and you're like, is this going to work? And I'm fairly confident on this one because it's pretty simple, but okay, so our leg
Famous
inset.
Last words, right?
Yeah, as it breaks in front of
live
everyone
show,
here.
right? Yeah.
Okay, so I flexed the legs and I hit apply and they moved. And so that looks good. The length, let's just drop it down to 7 and apply. Okay, no errors. It seemed to evenly change. Let's go to 2 feet. Okay, and the height, 2.5 feet. Oh, a line is too short. What did I do? Oh,
thickness is going down.
I changed the thickness of the table rather than me.
Your tabletop was as tall as the legs.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, sometimes it's just user error. Okay. Awesome. So let's just hit the table height. Yeah. Okay. So great. So the reason you now know going ahead, everything was working up to this point, right? So if there's a problem later, it's between what I've done now and later. And I just keep doing that in steps because when it gets complicated, and like I said, I can take this family to the nth degree. Like we're going to put chairs, we can make it, calculate how many chairs go along the side. Like I'm going to go in as deep as we want with this, but right now it seems simple. And so you're like, why are you doing all this? But it's because it's going to get complicated that you do all these things.
Right. And actually what you just did there, going back to the whole creating types to flex, I think one of the nice things about what you're doing is you can apply one parameter at a time too, right? So
yeah.
If you did a type parameter, you'd be whole scale flipping them. And if you needed to troubleshoot, it may be helpful to be able to say, change this first, click apply, change that first, click apply. So I guess that's sort of two approaches to the flexing of our skeleton.
Yeah. I would say that's a very critical thing, actually, just flexing one thing at a time. Because I used to flex them all at once, and you're like, what broke?
What broke? Yeah, broke? You have to read the errors, go through all the orange text, and figure out what the hell just happened. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've had it before where what a parameter works until you change another parameter, and then what did work doesn't work. So it's
So there was a comment here. Actually, I think it's a tip. It's a pretty good one. I didn't even notice you could do this. And maybe you can or can't. I don't know. I guess we could try it out. But I think it's Bornstein. Sorry, I can't really read that from here. But he mentioned mentioned that if you draw reference planes in the edit mode, remember we were talking about drawing reference planes in edit mode. I guess there's a checkbox or something that says reveal outside of edit mode.
Oh.
I didn't know. I mean, I guess we could try that out, but
I didn't know that either.
I guess we'll take your word for it. Unless we want to try it live, we could try that, I guess. But apparently there's a checkbox when you're in edit mode to draw a reference plane. Let's just see. Before we tell the whole world, let's see if it's true. I don't see it.
Origin subcategory.
He said reveal them in outside by clicking the reveal constraints icon in the view control bar. Reveal constraints.
Oh, okay.
I see. So when I get it. Okay, there we go. So you're not actually making it visible outside of it. You're viewing it using a view setting. I see. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I know what she's talking about. Or they, whoever.
They, you, he, them.
Yeah. Okay. We'll just do it. Yeah, and then we'll finish this. Yeah, that is a good tip. Down here, reveal constraints. Yeah, any hidden constraints this will bring. That was a tip for later, but yeah, I'm glad she brought that up.
But that also is version dependent, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that this is a lot of these are newer.
Yeah, yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Got it, man.
Now,
And
because I
everyone's just
think,
laughing at Revit City that we keep mentioning it. We'll stop. That's the last time we'll say Revit City. I promise, guys. No
dude,
more Revit
Revit
City
City
talk.
was my best friend
I
learning.
mean,
It still kind of is my friend for like if I just have to do something quick and dirty. It's still good. It's gotten a
no,
lot
it is. I'm
slower.
not gonna knock on Revit City. I just know how, I get it. There's a lot of, there's not a lot of quality control on the families out there. Just that's all we have to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. So the next level of complicated we're going to do is we're going to introduce the concept of nesting, which just briefly is when you have another family that you want to put inside this family as if this family was a project. And so that's what we're going to do. And I'm also going to stop right here and say there are multiple ways. At this point, we're going to start diverging. There's like 100 ways you can start doing things the more we get into it.
Mm-hmm.
You could take this table now that it's parametric, and we could just start a new generic family and nest the table and then bring in and nest the chairs and do what I'm about to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to do that all right now. I'm just going to nest the chairs directly into the table family. But I think a cleaner way to do it would probably be to make a new family for like the assembly for the,
Mm-hmm.
of the whole thing.
Right.
Okay, so as usual, I'm going to start with a skeleton. And so basically for the chairs, actually, let's first just bring in a chair. So we're going to load a family. I have a chair somewhere here, a traditional chair. We're going to load it in and then place it. So we're just going to set it here. So what we need to do in order to place these correctly is we need to locate it, left and right. So we'll need like how far out it's going to be scooted out from the table, and then where linearly along here it's going to go. So this first line that I'm dimensioning here is going to be the back of the chair. So I'm just going to align that to the work plane inside of the chair. I'm going to lock it. So then the next one is like left and right. So I'm going to copy this over. And I'm going to say for this particular table design, it makes sense to control where this chair is based on this leg. We don't want people straddling, and we're not going to push the chair into the leg. It's physically impossible. So I'm going to align that to the chair's center and click OK. And then we're just going to find the dimension that works here. And because I practiced this earlier, I know that it should be 11. And then we'll do this one over here. And on this one, we're going to align it to the center of the table. And then we need to do an offset here. Okay, and then we're going to assign a parameter to these. And we'll just put, for now, we're just going to do chair tuck. And then let's just, then I need to constrain this chair. All right, now I'm just going to really quickly flex it just to make sure it's working. Oh, we also need to get rid of this test parameter that I made. Okay, chair tuck is not an important parameter, so I'm going to move it to the bottom of my list. Okay, so that scooted our chairs in just as I would have expected, so that's great. And then we can mirror it. And like I said, I'm just going to do this on purpose. I'm going to mirror these and assume it's going to work, and then we're going to flex it. All right, so now we've got our table with chairs all over. And I'm just going to, oh, this leg inset needs to go down too. That's not very important. So length will go to 7 feet. Oops. And width we'll do 4. Okay, so you can see just because these two chairs were working and we mirrored those does not mean the other chairs work at all. This one's now scooted out from the table. These are inside the table. So that's what we were talking about earlier, is don't really mirror things. You don't know what Revit keeps and what it doesn't. So I'm just gonna realign all of these. Oh, and we need our parameter. is on the other side here.
So as you're doing this, there was a question earlier that I guess makes sense to bring up now, which is had to do with when do you choose? I know this example you're using, chairs, you're making an assembly, but let's say for the initial table, some people would do the legs as a nested family in the tabletop. I mean, how, in your experience, how have you decided sort of how far to nest families? I mean, I'm sure the casework, having seen it, there was certain things that make sense to nest, certain things that don't. Is there a reason you decide something is a nested object versus not, as far as like a component of a family instead of an assembly of multiple families?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because it's bit me in the past. So
I'm assuming so, and I'm hoping that you had an experience that gives a little insight into how you approach it.
Definitely. So if it's going to be a complicated shape and I want it to host on something that might move, that kind of relationship is hard. If you have a complex, like if the legs, so the reason I chose this design is because it's so simple, but a lot of like, say it was mid-century modern and the legs were coming out, at an angle in both like a 45 from the corner of the table, that is going to be complicated to keep moving with the table if you try to build it all in here. So that is a case, like if it's complicated geometry and it's going to need to move around, I will probably do that as a separate family and then be careful where I put my center origin. And then when I bring that in, I'll constrain those center reference planes in the new family. Another thing I don't do is, so my experience where it bit me was when I first made my cabinet families, I thought I was the coolest thing because I made them do everything. Like the base cabinets, I had the ability to, like, you could say it was an end cabinet and it would automatically put an end panel on one side of the cabinet, the left or the right. And I also built them because I knew I was going to be repeating some things. And so I built them outside to bring them back in. But I would so a drawer is the example. I built the drawer as a separate family and I would bring it in to the main and line it up with the main box so that I could repeat it. But inside the drawer family, I also had hardware, which I had nested inside the drawer. So it was like those Russian dolls where it was like nested. And I can tell you, if you nest more than maybe one layer deep, it starts to significantly slow down the model. So what would happen is I got to, on some of the complex families, because it was nested in a nested and nested, like 3 or 4 layers deep, when I would make a change, it would literally take 3 minutes for Revit to regenerate when I was in a project. And it's like, I'm trying to save people time. They don't want to wait 4 minutes for the cabinet to regenerate. So I won't nest too deep. And so
in that example, let's say, so I see what you're saying there. You'd have the cabinet base, and then you'd bring in the drawer, and then in the drawer there's the handle nested. Did you notice a performance decrease if you brought in the drawer and the handle into that base family? So you're only one deep, but you have 3 or 4 different nested. That wasn't the issue. The issue was the multiple deep families.
Exactly. Yeah. I haven't seen any problems with nesting a bunch of families in one family. It's how deep they go. Yep. Because it basically, basically Revit had to regenerate. It had to go, like, when you are in a project, you regenerate the family, and then that family has to open the nested family, regenerate it, but that causes it to open another family. You get the idea.
Got it. Yeah. No, that's great. So that's what I was hoping. I was hoping that you had some horror stories to let people know not to go too deep with the nesting.
Yeah. So it was tempting because here's the thing. What I had to do to fix it was I had to take the hardware out. And I thought I was being clever because not only was the drawer a family, but the panel on the drawer, because a drawer essentially is a panel with a back and then hardware. So I also was using that panel family just like above like a kitchen, like on a kitchen sink where it's just a blank panel. So I was doing it to make it easier to build for me, but it was a nightmare to use. So what I had to do was make it a nightmare for me to build, but now it operates much faster. But for me to build them, it takes a lot longer now.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. So let's test these. We've got them now constrained properly, hopefully. And let's just apply that. And now they're moving, right? Okay. So this, you might call it good. Maybe this is good enough. And this is where you have to know your case use or your end user. If this was in-house, maybe this is enough, depending on what they want to do. If it was a manufacturer and the set comes with, 6 chairs and it's a set length, maybe this is good enough. But for me and my clients, I feel like they need to be able to move this anyway, and it just needs to work. So I would take this a lot more layers deep. So I think, in my opinion, this family should be able to distribute based on the length. It should distribute the chairs properly. Mm-hmm. So in addition to introducing kind of the nested concept, we're going to do an array, and we're going to try to control the array. So that's how, if you ever want repetitive multiples of anything, you want it to be a nested family, bring it in, and then you array it, is how you're going to get it to repeat. So the first time I ever did this, it was because I was building a louver for a building, a mechanical louver, and the vents needed to be. So that was my first experience with it. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do is we're just going to click on the chair. It's constrained. I just deleted the other ones, and this one still kept all its constraints. And we're just going to do an array. And you need to make sure, depending on the logic you're using, it's important which thing you pick up here. Either you're about to choose the second instance of the array, or you're going to pick the last instance of the array, right? If you pick the second one, then the dimension you give it is the spacing. It means you want to choose the spacing between the chairs. If you pick the last, you're basically telling it what you want it to do is take the distance between the first and the last and distribute everything evenly in between. So you're either picking the overall distance or the distance between each instance of the chair. So in this case, I'm going to pick the last, and I'm going to distribute it over to our other side. And then it automatically asks you how many you want. So I'm just going to hit 3. Okay, so awesome. Now it's got these chairs here. And the only thing we need to do is make sure the last chair is constrained properly, because right now it's floating loose, and you can see what it does. It'll just take a straight line and distribute everything across there. So I'm going to constrain it really quickly. Okay, so now what we've got here is, if we go 9 feet long and click OK, it's going to distribute it evenly. And then what you can do, again, we're approaching your end user and how you think they're going to use it. If you think the person's going to be intelligent enough to know that if they lengthen the table, they need to add more chairs, cool. All you need to do is click here. So you click on the array, and it brings up this little bracket that connects them all with this number on top. If you click the bracket, you can assign it a label, which is basically assigning it a parameter. So we're just going to add a parameter, and I'm just going to call it number chairs. And in this case, it's not a dimension. So if it's not a dimension, I categorize it, just my standard is I put it in graphics, because you're controlling the graphics, and it puts it up high in the hierarchy in the list of parameters. Mm-hmm. So I do it for that reason. All right, so if you have a semi-sophisticated user, they're going to know that they can change the amount of chairs in here. So now we can change it back down to 2, and maybe we can put it to a 6.5 foot table. And now there's only 2 chairs, the table shortened, or we could do like a boardroom table that's 15 feet long and do like 5 chairs. Oh, we can even fit more. And it'll evenly distribute whatever the user puts in. Okay, so that's an extra parameter you can put in that helps the user not have to get out of Revit or get into the family environment, but still control the amount of chairs, right?
The back to the performance issues. Have you? I know that arrays can impact the performance depending on how the families are built. Is there any sort of tips that you can give as far as what to look out for when using arrays in families and maybe even nesting or whatnot as far as performance, or you haven't really run into it?
I have nothing I've done is taxed it too badly. The louver vent, where there were so many, that kind of taxed it a little bit because it's building that geometry. But for the most part, I haven't run into anything too crazy on what I've done.
I guess the only part I was thinking of is if you were to take that louver vent and nest it into another family and then load it in. I feel like I feel like that causes a little bit of an issue because then you're doing the same thing, but you're doing it through arrays or through a nest. So I think it doubles up on what you're just talking about. But
that's true.
I was curious.
Maybe
you just haven't run in that use case, but I was curious.
I'm trying to think if I've ever done an array nested into something. I don't think I have.
Well, good. Then you haven't had to see the horror. So we're running out of time here. So what I wanted to do is just make sure. And this is awesome. This is great, and everyone's still completely engaged and asking a ton of questions, which is awesome. But I honestly just need to go to bed too at some point, so I can't be here all day. But no, I'm just kidding. So let's just to sort of wrap it up. I want to make sure that we've hit at least a lot of the main pain points or tips or something that you've had. So maybe to sort of wrap it up, if you go through your list or any sort of final words of one or two of the sort of what you think would be the most valuable tips in your list, and then we could wrap it up that way. A couple of people just said we can confirm that nested arrays really slow things down.
Someone's been burned.
and Scoured wants a part 2, so maybe we'll do a part 2. Maybe this will be the introduction to family tips from Brenton, and then we'll do more of an advanced one in the next go around. Maybe we'll pick apart your cabinet families or something, and sort of maybe just talk about how you took some of these tips and tricks and built those families.
Oh yeah, I could tell you I've used all of these in my families.
Awesome.
Man, I'm trying to think. My tips just get more and more complicated based on what we were doing. So I'm trying to think of something that we could just do. Something that a lot of people don't know that's kind of fun. And I do this. This is how I do this in a lot of my families, like my cabinet hardware, like from Revit, the project, you can change the hardware style. And you do that by, once you have a nested family, if you click the instance of the family, you can go up here, there's a label button, and you can hit add parameter. So we could do like chair style. And so what that does is in your parameter list, you now have, I didn't categorize it properly, but now you have a chair style parameter. And you can click, and there's a drop down of every other type. So let's load in another family. It'll be easier. So I'm going to.
Of course, you choose one that has one type, right?
Yeah. So I'm gonna load in this other chair. So now when we go to our family parameters, now it gives me that second chair, that style. So now I can click OK, and you can see it changed the style of the chair. And that's pretty powerful depending on what you're trying to create. You can preload, but there's a lot of caveats that go with that. I'm not going to go into them now, but if you do it blindly, you could end up hurting yourself, but it's really useful when you follow some rules.
Yeah. And that's one of those things where I think a lot of people have seen families where you can change types, but just showing how you add parameter, that's something that I know when I'm teaching people, no one ever notices that. Like when you have a nested family, if you click it, you can actually add the parameter to it. So that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of any other like life-changing ones. Honestly, the ones that have saved me the most times are these first ones that we did, that we've talked about already.
Setting it up right. Yep.
Firm base.
I'll leave with one last one because I'm curious, since you spend a lot of time in the family creation world. I have in the past seen educational content about creating Revit families where there's been deep debates on direction of reference planes. Have you seen any of those or ever dealt as far as there's a top and a bottom or what direction? I'm always curious because my take on it is one thing, but I'm curious to hear your take on it, if you even pay attention to it.
I definitely don't pay attention to it just because I don't think it's caused me much grief. I do remember, though, I did have one problem once that did take me forever to troubleshoot, and I think it came down to the reference plane direction. But No, honestly, I haven't run into that big of problems.
That's awesome.
Is that
Yeah,
the
no,
wrong
I
answer?
don't remember who it was, but I just remember there being a deep debate once on that, and I think I even got some comments on a few of my videos about like not caring about it, and I still my
Yeah.
stance is still I don't care about it, but I'm sure that
Yeah.
there's
Okay.
someone out there who does. So
The
I was
the
curious to hear,
perfect
but I was
the
curious.
the perfectionist in me that wants to control everything, it appeals to that side of me,
Yes,
but the
yes.
practical side, I'm like, it just has never caused me that many problems, so why would I care?
Awesome, awesome. All right, well let's
Um,
end it there, and I think maybe what we'll do is we'll have Brenton back on. It looks like everyone's enjoying this, and maybe we'll have you back on, and we'll do a deeper dive, and maybe even dig into a little more complex and talk about and maybe even pull back the cabinets or something, and
oh yeah,
everyone seems
sure.
to want it. So we'll figure that out off the air another
I
date.
have
Go ahead.
I have one quick thing
Yeah,
if
sure.
you're okay.
Yeah.
I was just going to share, if you want to go to my website, I have this for free, but I have like, I showed you this. I don't know if it's of value right now for everyone. Oh, it's on the part of the screen you can't see. Um, Let me just restart Bluebeam.
Blue beam.
My cheat sheet for everything. Do you remember that I sent you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if anyone's made families,
Mm-hmm.
they should understand the value. Um, but I have this really cool cheat sheet I made for myself and then made it pretty for everyone else. Spent hours, but it gives you the syntax. And we didn't get into equations today. That was
Mm-hmm.
probably like the next step.
Yep.
But it gives you all the syntax for all the equations you can use in a Revit family. And then it gives you a bunch of great trig equations to use when you're constraining geometry and making up those equations.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got a whole section on troubleshooting some common errors that like you'll definitely get if you make families. And
Mm-hmm.
then I put together these great equation charts where like if you're trying to constrain in a triangular, or if you're using trig at all,
Mm-hmm.
you can look up on one side the two variables that you know,
Mm-hmm.
and the third one that you want to solve for. You just take that along the top, and the intersection gives you the equation already in Revit syntax, so you can just put it right in.
Awesome.
um, yeah, some of this
Awesome.
took me like weeks to solve, so
Yeah, I know. I've the only time I ever used all the stuff that I learned in like geometry in school was building families, so
yeah,
Pythagoras
exactly.
theorem and triangles and Sakatoa and all that stuff. All right, awesome. So they can get that at revitfamily.biz.
Yep, there's a section called, I'll send you a link
Yeah,
and you
and
can.
I'll make sure all the links. If you guys want to contact Brenton, if you want to check out his site, I'll make sure all the links are in the description here in the video below. And then I'll have the replay on the blog tomorrow. So Brenton, thank you so much for joining, and we'll definitely have you back. Everyone really enjoyed it, so I appreciate you doing this. And any final words before we head out?
No, thanks for having me. It was great. My
Awesome,
first
man.
live experience.
You did wonderful, man. You did great. All right, cool. So thank you guys. Thank you for joining me tonight. I appreciate it. Always great to hang out with new viewers and returning viewers here on the chat. You guys are amazing. Thank you to Polycam as well as Enscape for sponsoring the show and the Big Bad BIM tip of the week. Remember, for Polycam, head over to polycam.bimafterdark.com or go back to the beginning of the video, hit that little QR code. And then for Enscape, head on over to enscape.bimafterdark.com. I'll see you guys next week. Have a lovely weekend. And with that, I want to bid you adieu. Oh, don't forget to subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. We're actually really close to 50,000 subscribers. So if you haven't done so, make sure you subscribe so we can push over the 50,000 threshold. With that, I want to bid you all adieu, and I'll see you next week.